The Competition Commission's Cost of Living report has highlighted that the rising economic strain on households is deepening. The report, covering the period between March 2020 and March 2025, found that low-income households carry the heaviest burden. It also revealed that the price of non-food items like water and electricity, which have risen above inflation, have contributed to workers spending almost two-thirds of their monthly earnings on necessities. Economist at the Commission, Andiswa Sibhukwana, explains.
In essence, the cost of living report has highlighted key elements. It's basically alluded to the rising economic strain on households. Households have faced deep financial pressure, especially low-income communities. There has been inflation in essential goods, which is outpacing wage growth, therefore reducing purchasing power of consumers. And then the food and alcoholic beverages making over 40% of spending for poorest households, making future inflation particularly harmful.
All right, we've roped in Professor Isaac Kambule, political economist at the University of Johannesburg, as well as Bulelani Balabala, founder of Township Entrepreneurs Agency. Good afternoon to you both, and thank you so much for your time. Prof, let's start with you. In the main, and parts of the report that I have glanced at, the report warns that without urgent intervention, the cost of living crisis will continue to deepen inequality, especially when you consider small businesses and how households are now barely getting by. Of concern, of course, is what we've just said now, is that, that found that low-income households carry the heaviest burden. What are your takeouts?
Unity and good day to the SABC viewers as well. This is definitely an indictment for the government in terms of the key issues that we are facing now. If you look at the report, it states that over two-thirds of which again amounts to 68.8% of the budgets of low-income families is spent on food, housing, and utilities. And we can imagine, again, if we also consider the fact that most of these families are also debt-ridden and they are unable to even save any income at the end of the month. And we also know, again, of particular studies that indicate that the entire salary is normally spent within the first 2 days after payday. And this is again showing us that as a country, we have a high rate of people who are close to poverty. And in addition to this, again, that there hasn't been much that has been done to increase the salaries of workers to be able to sustain themselves in this particular era. And it is likely, again, going to push people to face major or severe, again, issues of shortage of food in their households, and as well as a number of other issues that may likely impact not only their sustainability, but also the ability of learners to also cope in school if we are facing such detriments.
Bulelani, let's bring you in. And as someone who works very closely with the township entrepreneurs, it is worrying when you consider that township households spend over two-thirds of income on food, housing, and utilities. These are necessities. How is this cost squeeze affecting small businesses and informal traders in the main?
Now, thank you so much for having me on the platform, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think for me, it goes without saying. I went through the reports, and I think so there's some very stark figures there. 68% over the past 5 years has been the percentage increase for electricity, with water being at 50%, education sitting at about 42%, and taxi fares, running between 32 to about 33 to about 34%. And I think, one of the things that we've picked up over the years, I think when you look at the lockdown and you look at the looting and various other macroeconomic issues, is the fact that the people, the part of the economy or the market that always gets hit the hardest is the township consumer. You sort of touched on it with your opening to talk to the fact that, two-thirds of whatever income an individual is making who resides and operates within the township is already being spent. Now, one of the key things that we have then picked up and unpacked is that 90% of our data shows us that majority of these enterprises, especially the registered enterprises for the benefit of this conversation, operate from home or operate from garages that they rent out in various parts of the country in townships. Now, a big part of that is they need to utilize the electricity. And the big frustration and the challenge of this is that it is no longer an indirect effect of the cost of living. These are the direct effects of the cost of living, which have driven socioeconomic issues like crime. And I think for me, the biggest challenge that I see rising out of this is three things really. Is the reduced, from a township entrepreneur's perspective, the reduced customer demand, the higher cost of operating, and then the last one is stalled growth, which is what we have seen over the past couple of years.
And I mean, Prof, what Bulelani is also highlighting are these very high numbers when you consider that, as he said also, that water and electricity have been rising above inflation. Electricity prices up 68% in 5 years. I mean, other prices that have risen up dramatically, healthcare and education, GP consultation costs rose by 33%, while public school fees rose by between 37 and 42%, outpacing inflation. And of course, the fact that interest rates remain high too. One wonders, and the question then remains, are monetary policies unintentionally worsening inequality in this country?
Well, definitely that is bound to be the case. I mean, if you look at the inflation that was sitting at 6.6%, that is also quite problematic. And in addition to this, I mean, if you look at our stifled growth rate, it hasn't been really assisting the country, because we know if we can't get as many people into employment and as well as also having a bulk of our people on social grants, that is going to cause a number of things. But if you also look at the inflation side again, it is also issues related to electricity prices and as well as water tariffs that also tend to push our inflation upwards. And in this particular case, I think for me, from where we are standing, there really needs to be key anchored policies that are going to address the issue of electricity prices and as well as water tariffs, because we know even poor people now are paying more for electricity and they're getting lesser and lesser kilowatts at the end of the day, of which again shows that in as much as Eskom is making a significant recovery, but it has been at the cost of the poor, because again, even now, even the richer or those who are in the middle class are also struggling because of high electricity tariffs and as well as surcharges that are mainly charged by various municipalities. And it tells you that the current state is not sustainable. And if the government does not necessarily address these issues, we are bound again to see a spike in the number of people with illegal electricity connections and as well as water connections in this case.
Yeah, and Bulelani, just listening to the Prof and also just reflecting on some of your earlier words, you always hear how vital township economy is to the country's GDP. And yet, you know, there are these problems. If township entrepreneurs are empowered, I mean, could they become a buffer against South Africa's cost of living crisis? I would imagine the answer would be yes. So the question then is, how does government, how does civil society assist township entrepreneurs in this regard?
Sorry, I had muted myself there. Thank you so much for that. And I think for me, you know, the big frustration, and just before we enter how civil society can jump in, is the fact that it's not just at the frustration that comes with the result of the increased cost of operating. It's the fact that ordinarily you can't even operate because of wailing infrastructure, you know, where over 30% of your operation is morphed throughout the month with the fact that there is no power or there is no water. And that's the big frustration that is faced by individuals that live in township, as well as these businesses that operate within the space. And then on top of that, you then mar that with the excessive increase to cost is the big frustration for me. And I think the big clarion call, in my view, is the fact that we need provincial, local governments.
Seems that we've lost Bulelani there. But Prof, perhaps as we wrap up our conversation too, just in light of the frustrations raised by Bulelani, and as we look at some of the solutions here that we could probably pinpoint, just looking ahead, which single policy intervention do you think could have, you know, the greatest impact in reducing the cost of living crisis, especially when we look at the township entrepreneurs, as also we've been speaking about?
Thank you so much, Onati. I think at this point, it is related to the country's fiscal capabilities. And as we stand, I think the country is unable to even account for how much we spend. So if we spend wisely and also ensure that we hold not only our state-owned enterprises that produce electricity and water to account, but that we also hold the local government system to account, then we are likely going to see greater returns, and as well as lowering the cost of transportation, and as well as addressing issues of infrastructure that mainly faces a lot of these poor communities, because we know that on a daily basis, we saw even today that in eThekwini, the taxis were not operating, and that basically is a huge dent to the economy. So how do we then ensure that everyone is happy at the end of the day? And it starts with how the country manages its fiscus.
Bulelani, you were giving us a picture and painting the picture essentially of just some of the frustrations on the ground before we can even start roping in government and civil society in terms of assisting.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I mean, I think one of the main things that I was highlighting is that over and above the frustrations that are highlighted in the Competition Commission report, it's the fact that basic services are not even, reaching these micro enterprises as well as small businesses that operate within the township, and they are left with frustrations where, about 30% of their operations are already morphed and frustrated at the fact that they are unable to have basic access to the electricity that they pay for and the water that they pay for, which is the frustration of not even just the small business owner, but for any individual who resides within the township. So one of the main key things that we really need is that we really need and are driving for is for local government to really prioritize these hubs of economic development that were supposed to be in place many years ago. And I think in many parts of the country that you go to, they are there, but they're almost non-operational as essential spaces that these micro enterprises are able to access power from. And then I think for me, over and above that, I think from a civil society perspective, it's just increasing the clarion call to civil society that talks to, please, let's ensure that whatever you have, whether it's R1 or R5, don't undermine that money that you have in your pocket. Let us spend with intention and deliberateness. Spend that money on a local business, because the local economy, the local individuals and the local economy are the only ones, in my view, in the market who will be able to hire and create the employment numbers that government is looking for. And I think you're right, and you encapsulate it properly. Finance minister, every time they give the state of the nation or the state of finance or the state of whatsoever, the province, whatever those addresses are given, one of the key things that always comes up is small businesses being the backbone of the economy, but we don't see that ripple effect trickling down in policy and market access and funding. And I think we need to see it sort of coming upstream as opposed to the consistent calls to formalize, whereas I think what we need to actually do is that government in and themselves need to formalize themselves on the systems and processes that are already at play and working in the township economy, and then change how they actually operate. And that's how you make the market inclusive.
I think I'm going to leave it there in terms of that clarion call, Bulelani, but thank you to you both, gentlemen, for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Isaac Kambule, political economist from the University of Johannesburg, as well as Bulelani Balabala, founder of a Township Entrepreneurs Agency, just commenting there on the latest report by the Competition Commission's cost of living report, highlighting the rise of economic strain on households and that it is deepening, which is a worrying trend.